Autumn wind swept through Willow Creek like a low, unending note. It slid across the gray rooftops, rattled through the sagging fences, and lifted golden dust along the town's main road. The air carried the scent of dry grass, hot iron, and burning pine, the smell of the West after harvest, of people still learning how to survive one more year. Nathan Boone stood leaning against the wall of the blacksmith's shop, hands buried deep in his coat pockets, brim of his hat shadowing his eyes. At 35, he looked carved from the same stone as the land, weathered, silent, immovable. His face was darkened by sun, his pale gray eyes accustomed to harsh light and loss. It had been 3 years since his wife died one winter night, leaving him with a child who would not speak and a house too large for just the two of them. His daughter, Ruth, 4 years old, seldom smiled or spoke. She feared loud sounds, sudden movements, even gentle touch. Each evening she sat on the porch swing, clutching a mended cloth doll, her gaze fixed on some faraway promise that would never return. 3 days from now would be Harvest Blessing Day, when every family stood before the church, hand in hand, to receive the season's blessing. No one stood alone. In Willow Creek, that was the rule unspoken. A child standing alone was seen as an omen. Nathan knew that. He'd thought of keeping Ruth home, but she'd whispered, barely more than breath, "I won't go if Mama's not there." He'd asked the cook, a neighbor, even a widow from town to go with them. Ruth only stared, then screamed when any came near. So Nathan decided to ride into town and find someone, anyone, who could stand beside him for a single day, just so his daughter could have peace. Raised voices snapped him from thought. In front of Grayson's dry goods, a woman stood rigid, her voice clear and firm. "My father's gone, Mr. Grayson. I won't pay a debt that isn't mine." The shopkeeper, a heavy-set man, scowled and barked. "Then your name's off my list for good." She didn't flinch. "That's your choice." Nathan stopped walking. The woman was unlike anyone he'd seen in Willow Creek. She wore a plain brown dress, hem frayed, her hair braided neatly under a thin shawl. Her skin was the deep color of dark honey, her eyes black and steady, carrying a calm that made the man before her seem small. When she turned, sunlight touched her cheek, revealing a faint scar, a thin crescent mark that did nothing to diminish her dignity. Without knowing why, Nathan stepped closer. Maybe it was the way she held herself, straight-backed, unafraid of being seen. He tipped his hat. "Ma'am." She paused, frowning slightly. "Can I help you?" "I heard your name's Amara Hayes," he said, voice low, uncertain. "I have a proposal." Amara narrowed her eyes. "I don't know you." "I'm Nathan Boone. I own a ranch 3 miles out. My daughter's to attend the harvest blessing. She—" He hesitated. "She can't go without her mother. Her mother's gone." Amara studied him. Her guarded face softened for a heartbeat. "What is it you want from me?" "Just to stand with us during the ceremony. 1 day only. I'll pay fair." She gave a disbelieving laugh. "You're trying to hire yourself a wife for a day?" "No. I'm trying to hire someone who won't frighten a child." He reached inside his coat and pulled out a small envelope. "Enough to clear your debt with Grayson, and more." The wind picked up, twining strands of her hair across her face. Their eyes met. The divide of color, class, and past suspended for a moment. In Nathan's gray gaze there was no pity, only honesty. Amara looked at the envelope, then at his hand. Rough, sun-browned, trembling slightly. You think I'll say yes for money? He shook his head. No, I think you understand fear, and my daughter needs someone who does. The road shimmered with dust. Wagon wheels rolled past. The church bell tolled faintly in the distance. She stood silent for a long while, then murmured, My mother's ill. Medicine isn't cheap. Nathan nodded, said nothing, and held the envelope out. She took it. Their hands brushed, warm, dry, fleeting. One day, she said. One day, he answered. But neither of them knew. In that quiet, golden street, what truly began was not an agreement. It was everything that would follow. Morning in Willow Creek began under a veil of thin white fog, soft as a handkerchief laid across the earth. The sun had not yet fully risen. Only faint beams filtered through the pines, spilling patches of milky light into the valley. Amara stepped out of the small inn, carrying an old cloth bag. Nathan Boone was already waiting by the gate beside his wagon. His gray horse swished its tail, snorting into the cold dawn air. Nathan tipped his hat, a little awkward. Thank you for agreeing to this, he said quietly, his voice nearly swallowed by the mist. Amara gave a small nod without replying. Wrapped in her gray wool cloak, she looked slender, almost fragile, yet carried a composure that made him feel uncertain of himself. The wagon rolled forward, wheels grinding against damp gravel. The mist curled around them as the dirt road wound out of town like a ribbon. Nathan held the reins, eyes fixed ahead. He was not a man used to conversation, least of all with strangers, and certainly not with a woman. Amara sat beside him, fingers gripping the strap of her bag. She watched the dim shapes of hills through the fog, listening to the steady rhythm of hooves, like the heartbeat of someone trying to stay calm. The silence between them was thick but not uncomfortable, more like untouched air waiting to be filled. She spoke softly. You live there alone? With my daughter, Nathan answered without turning. Her name's Ruth. His voice was low, with a faint gentleness hiding beneath the roughness. How old is she? 4. A pause. She doesn't talk much, not since her mother passed. Amara looked down at the frayed seams of her gloves. A man carrying an old wound. A child learning to live inside silence. She understood that feeling too well, when the world is so loud that all you can do is hide inside yourself. The horse whinnied as they turned onto a sunlit path. The fog thinned, revealing golden grass stretching to the base of distant hills. Ahead stood white fences and a wisp of smoke curling above a roof. Boone Ranch. Nathan glanced over. You ever ridden before? Only a few times at school, Amara said. Not very well. He nodded, and as the wagon stopped, offered his hand. Careful, the steps high. She placed her hand in his, trying to steady herself, but her skirt caught under her boot. Nathan instinctively reached out, catching her by the waist before she could stumble. For a fleeting second, his rough palm steadied her, his breath brushed her hair, and the scent of leather and pine soap hung between them, brief but unmistakable. Amara pulled back, murmuring, I'm all right. Nathan nodded, face flushed. He lifted her bag from the wagon and gestured toward the porch. This way. The cabin stood neat and quiet, a wide porch lined with an old rocking chair. The air was so still they could hear birds fluttering through the trees. Then the door burst open. Oh, small girl came running out, golden hair tangled, bare feet muddy. "Papa!" Her voice was high and trembling but bright. Then Ruth froze, wide-eyed, at the sight of the woman beside her father. Nathan opened his mouth to explain, but Ruth suddenly gasped. "Miss Hayes!" Amara blinked. "Ruth?" The girl ran to her, tripping on her dress, eyes alight with joy. "You taught me the word son yesterday. You came to visit me?" Nathan turned to Amara. "You're her teacher?" Amara nodded slowly, speech caught in her throat. She had never guessed that the quiet man outside the blacksmith's shop was the father of her most silent student. Ruth clung to Amara's hand, her small fingers gripping tight. "I told my friends you're as pretty as the mothers in storybooks." Silence fell between the three of them. Nathan looked at her with something between gratitude and confusion. Amara bent down, smiling faintly, trying to steady her own trembling hands. "Hello, Ruth." The girl tilted her head, then suddenly threw her arms around Amara's waist. It was a small, urgent embrace, but real. Her voice was a whisper against Amara's dress. "You'll be my mama today, won't you?" Nathan froze. Amara couldn't speak. Only the wind moved, carrying the scent of wet earth and the fragile breath of something new being born. Amara's hand slowly came to rest on Ruth's back, trembling as if afraid to break the child's dream. Nathan watched them, gray eyes softening. And for the first time in 3 long years, he heard laughter. Small, uncertain, but alive, echoing through his home. Boone Ranch lay nestled between 2 hills, where wind swept across the roof and sunlight slipped through old wooden shutters each morning. For 3 long years, the house had known only 2 sounds: the whistle of wind and the creak of wood after nightfall. But since Amara arrived, another sound had returned. Small, bright, and warm as sunlight, a child's laughter. Ruth no longer hid beneath tables or behind doors. She followed Amara everywhere, whispering flower names, giggling when dirt splashed her dress. Even the old dog on the porch, once too weary to move, now wagged its tail and trotted after them. Amara spoke to Ruth in a calm, patient tone, never pushing, never forcing. Each word carried a quiet understanding Nathan himself had never mastered. He often watched them from a distance, feeling gratitude and something else, something unnamed, a slow warmth spreading through a heart that had forgotten how to thaw. On the 3rd morning, Amara asked if she might replant the marigolds around the porch. "She said she wants to see yellow when she wakes up," Amara explained, her dark eyes glinting in the early light. Nathan simply nodded. She rolled up her sleeves and knelt in the dirt, her hands turning brown with soil, stray strands of hair clinging to her cheek. There was something in that sight, strength and gentleness intertwined, that he couldn't look away from. He fetched a spade and knelt beside her. "Soil dries fast here. You'll need to water often." She looked up, teasing. "You know about flowers, do you?" "No," he said quietly. "Only what my wife used to do." Amara paused. Silence settled between them, filled only by wind brushing through the porch rails and the scent of damp earth. "She liked marigolds?" He nodded. "Every season. After she passed, I let the weeds take over. Ruth didn't want anyone touching the spot." Amara said nothing more. She simply kept digging, then handed him a packet of seeds. "Then help me, so your daughter can see them bloom again." He took it. Their fingers brushed. Just a touch, but it stopped something in him. A stillness, deep and startling. She didn't pull away. She only smiled faintly, and for a heartbeat, their eyes met, long enough for the first crack of warmth to split the frozen years between them. By afternoon, Ruth was running circles around the new flower bed, laughing freely. Nathan stood in the doorway, watching her, feeling the weight in his chest ease at last. That evening, Amara set the table with Ruth beside her. She cooked simply: cornbread, bean stew, a drizzle of honey. When Nathan stepped inside, the smell of warm food and his daughter's laughter made him stop at the threshold. For a moment, he just stood there, afraid to breathe and break the scene before him. "Would you like more stew?" Amara asked. "Yes, thank you," he said, sitting down, trying not to stare too long at her smile as she ladled him another serving. Ruth spoke more than she had in months, about school, about a barn cat that kept stealing milk. Each time she turned to Amara, her eyes lit up, that forgotten light Nathan thought he'd never see again. After supper, Ruth grew sleepy and leaned against Amara's shoulder. Amara lifted her gently, arms sure but tender, as if she feared waking the child's dream. Nathan followed them down the narrow hallway to the last door. That room hadn't changed since Lily's passing. Thin curtains, a small wooden bed, a carved rocking horse in the corner. Amara laid Ruth down, tucked the quilt around her, and sat by the bedside. Then she began to sing. From the doorway, Nathan watched as lamplight fell across her face. Her voice was low, tinged with sorrow, soft as wind over the plains. Ruth's fingers found hers in sleep, and a faint smile crossed the child's lips. When the song ended, Amara leaned forward and kissed the girl's forehead. Gently, naturally, as if she'd done it 100 times before. Nathan turned away, afraid that if he stayed, his heart would speak too loudly. He stepped onto the porch and sank into the old wooden chair. The night wind brushed past him, but for the first time it carried no cold. From inside came the sound of Amara's quiet voice soothing the child, and Ruth's faint reply, not crying, but whispering peace. In that moment, Nathan Boone understood. After 3 silent years, his house had finally remembered how to laugh. Evenings at Boone Ranch usually passed in quiet peace. The last light of day spilled gold through the wooden fence, drawing long, ribbon-like shadows across the dirt. Ruth sat by the window with a box of crayons, her small hand moving carefully over paper, while Amara sat opposite her, straightening old lesson plans. Nathan worked out on the porch, hammering loose boards on the stable. It was the kind of day that felt perfectly still, until a folded sheet slipped from Amara's satchel and fell to the floor. He bent to pick it up, a torn, yellowed newspaper. The headline caught his eye. "Missing Boy in Ohio. Teacher Questioned." Beneath it was a small photograph. The woman in the picture looked younger, her hair loose, her eyes wide and frightened. Amara Hayes. Nathan froze, the paper trembling in his hands. Wind swept through the porch, carrying dust and the metallic scent of coming rain. He didn't read further. He simply folded the paper and placed it on the table. When Amara entered the room and saw it, she stopped cold. The color drained from her face. Her fingers tightened around her notebook. "You read it?" she asked, her voice rough. "Only the headline," he said, without looking at her. The air thickened between them, as though the room had suddenly shrunk. She sank into a chair, shoulders tense, eyes fixed on the fire still glowing in the stove. "That boy disappeared on my last day teaching in Ohio. I was the last person who spoke to him. The police questioned me. The town whispered. They didn't want the truth. They just wanted someone to blame. Nathan said nothing. He stood on the porch, fists clenched, the lamplight cutting his face in half shadow, half doubt. I was cleared, she went on, her voice trembling. But they never let me go back. My mother sold the house to pay the debts. I came here because I thought, if no one knew my name, maybe I could start over. Silence. Only the crackle of burning wood. Nathan turned then, his eyes steady, his tone even. And you chose to teach again. Teaching is all I know, she said softly, tears glinting in her lashes. Children, they don't ask about the past. They just need someone who will wait long enough to listen. He pulled out a chair and sat across from her. For a long time, neither spoke. The firelight danced between them, not as accusation, but as something gentler, understanding, perhaps. Ruth burst into the room, waving a sheet of colored paper. Look, Papa, Miss Hayes. In the center of the page was a crude drawing, 3 figures holding hands beneath a crooked roof, a big yellow sun above them. At the bottom, in shaky letters, were the words, My family. Amara's breath caught. She reached out and brushed the paper lightly, as if touching something too precious to hold. Nathan looked from the picture to his daughter, then to her. In his eyes was a softness that wasn't pity, something deeper, slower, harder to name. It's beautiful, Ruth, he said quietly. Really beautiful. The girl beamed, wrapping her arms around Amara's leg before sitting beside her to keep drawing. Amara moved the picture gently aside and added a small flower pot in the corner. Marigolds, she said with a faint smile. So the house will always stay bright. Ruth nodded eagerly, her eyes gleaming. Later that night, after Ruth had gone to bed, Amara remained alone at the table. The oil lamp flickered, spreading amber light across the scattered papers and the crayon drawing. Nathan's footsteps faded somewhere outside. She unfolded the newspaper again. The words blurred slightly in the trembling of her hands. Then she folded it small, tucking it deep into her bag. No one believes me anymore, she whispered. But maybe that little girl does. Outside, the horse snorted softly. The wind brushed across the roof, carrying the faint scent of new marigolds blooming near the porch. Amara looked out the window and saw Nathan standing there. Still, silent, one hand resting on the porch beam, his gaze turned toward Ruth's window. The sight of him caught her breath. A man trying to remember how to trust. A woman learning what it means to be trusted. When the oil lamp began to fade, Amara picked up a pencil and wrote on a small scrap of paper. Every child deserves to feel safe, even grown ones. She folded it and slipped it into her notebook. A tear fell, light, quiet, as if afraid to wake the sleeping house. In the next room, Ruth stirred, one tiny hand still gripping the drawing that said, My family. The fire's glow reached through the window, painting 3 overlapping shadows on the wall, a man, a woman, and a child, merging softly into one. Morning broke over Willow Creek like liquid honey spilling across the hills. Sunlight rolled down onto the wooden rooftops, while church bells rang in gentle rhythm. Wagon wheels rattled over dirt roads. The air smelled of roasted corn, baked apples, and wildflowers. It was as if the whole town breathed in unison, waiting for something good to begin. In a small room at Boone Ranch, Ruth sat cross-legged on the bed amid scraps of fabric. Her eyes sparkled. This one, Mama. Her voice was soft, unguarded. Amara froze, then smiled faintly. She had never heard that word directed at her before. On the chair hung a pale yellow dress, one Ruth had pulled from Lily Boone's old chest. The fabric still shimmered faintly, the cuffs embroidered with tiny flowers. "Are you sure?" Amara asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ruth nodded, hair tumbling across her cheek. "Mama liked yellow. I do too. And today, I want a mama." Amara knelt to fix the ribbon on the girl's dress. "Just for today, all right?" Ruth tilted her head, grinning. "Maybe tomorrow, too." Nathan stepped in, adjusting his collar. He stopped when he saw them. Sunlight streamed through the window, touching Amara's dark skin and the yellow fabric, turning her into something warm and golden in the gray-toned house. He hesitated, half a smile lost somewhere between surprise and awe. "She picked it for me," Amara said lightly, breaking the silence. He nodded, though his eyes gave him away. Something had softened in them, an awareness that the woman before him was no longer pretending. By noon, the town was alive. Flags and ribbons fluttered in the breeze. Children darted through the crowd, laughter mingling with the scent of cider and sugar. When Nathan led his horse into the square, heads turned. "That's Boone," someone whispered. "And who's that with him?" Glances became murmurs. Women hid their mouths behind gloved hands. Men paused mid-step. A white widower, a black woman, and a little blonde child walking hand in hand. It was a sight that didn't fit the quiet order of Willow Creek. Amara heard every word. Each whisper was a thin blade, but she only tightened her grip on Ruth's hand. The girl's fingers laced back through hers, small and steady. Nathan felt the tension and, without a word, placed his hand over both of theirs. The gesture was simple, firm, a declaration without speech. The crowd quieted as they walked. Sunlight pooled around them, and for a breath of time, none of them looked away. They stopped before the altar. Pastor Grant, hair silver as frost, studied them for a long moment. Then his face softened into a smile. "You three look," he said, voice warm, "like a family that was always meant to be." No one spoke. Ruth only smiled, her small hand still wrapped in Amara's. Nathan looked down at her, then at Amara. Their eyes met. Just 1 second. But it was enough to change the rhythm of two hearts. The pastor began the blessing, the wind stirring the candle flame. "May this harvest bring healing to those who have known loss." Amara bowed her head. It felt like the prayer was spoken only for them. After the service, that the festival spread through the square. Ruth begged for candy. Amara crouched beside her, hands sticky with syrup, laughing as the girl tried to roll sugar dough. That laughter, full, unguarded, alive, was a sound Nathan hadn't heard in years. Mrs. Callahan, the baker, leaned close and whispered, "She brought your little one back to life, Mr. Boone." He nodded quietly. "I know." By evening, the sun slanted low, painting the hills in shades of rose and gold. Townsfolk gathered at the long tables, hands joined in thanks. When Pastor Grant began to pray, Nathan stood between Ruth and Amara. His fingers found Ruth's, then Amara's. 3 hands, linked. The last light of day bathed them in amber, a living portrait of peace. Ruth looked up at Amara. "I wish every day was like today." Amara squeezed her hand gently, her heart stuttering. Nathan turned. Their eyes met amid the crowd. calm, steady, certain. The line between pretense and truth had quietly vanished. When the prayer ended, applause rippled through the square. The scent of apples and wood smoke lingered in the cooling air. At the edge of the crowd, as Ruth skipped ahead, Nathan spoke softly, almost shyly. "Thank you." Amara looked at him. For what? For making her laugh again. Her smile trembled, eyes bright. "I only reminded her that she still has a home." The sun sank slowly behind the ridge, leaving a wash of amber across the sky. In that light, the three of them stood close. A man, a woman, and a child, needing no title, no promise. Only warmth. Only the fragile, new faith that maybe love could bloom even here, in a world that hadn't yet learned to bless it. And that night, as dusk settled over Boone Ranch, Nathan understood. Miracles don't fall from heaven. They live in the hands brave enough to hold on, despite everything the world might say. The night after the festival, Boone Ranch felt different, as if something within its walls had quietly changed. Firelight spilled from the hearth, tracing soft gold across the log walls. The scent of cornbread and honey lingered with the damp sweetness of earth after rain. Ruth sat at the table, her cheeks sticky with sugar, her eyes bright and alive, as though she carried a candle of her own, lit from the joy of the day. "Can I say something?" she asked, her voice small but clear. Nathan and Amara both looked up. Ruth smiled, then whispered, as if sharing a secret. I want to call you Mama." Amara froze. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Nathan's hand stopped midair. The fork slipped from his grasp and struck the plate. A small, sharp sound that cut through the stillness. "Ruth," he began, but the girl just giggled, returning to her plate, her joy untouched by the weight that had suddenly filled the room. Amara bowed her head, shoulders trembling slightly. Her voice, when it came, was barely audible. "She's only saying what she sees." Nathan stayed silent. He couldn't meet her eyes, afraid that in them he might see the truth he'd been avoiding, that this house, this child, this quiet woman, he wanted all of it to stay. Dinner ended in a hush. After Ruth was tucked into bed, Amara folded the tablecloth, set the dishes in the basin, her hands trembling faintly. "You don't have to do that," Nathan said, voice rough. "It's fine," she replied, not turning around. "When I don't know what to say, I work." He watched her, the curve of her shoulders, the slender figure framed in lamplight. "You'll be leaving soon, won't you?" She drew a quiet breath. It was only an agreement for one day, and that day's over. Then she stepped outside. The wind moved softly across the porch. Nathan remained in his chair, the hollowness inside him deep and cold. A noise from the stable made him rise. He grabbed a lantern and went out. Inside, Amara stood beside the gray mare, her hand resting on its warm neck, eyes distant. She turned when she heard him. "Couldn't sleep?" he asked. She shook her head lightly. "It's too quiet here. Quiet enough to hear your own heartbeat." Nathan hung the lantern on a hook. Its light flickered over her hair, turning it the color of dark honey. He stepped closer, close enough to hear her breathing, to smell hay and pine soap and rain. "What are you afraid of, Amara?" he asked softly. She smiled without looking at him. "Of trusting what was never meant to be mine. Of feeling happy." and losing it again. His voice dropped lower. I'm afraid too. Afraid that if I let myself hope, I'll make my little girl lose someone again. Silence. Only the horse's slow breath and the lantern's faint crackle. Amara turned toward him. Her eyes glimmered, reflecting the small flame. Can't you see, Nathan? Ruth doesn't need someone to replace her mother. She needs someone who'll stay. He held her gaze for a long moment, then took a step closer. She didn't move away. The distance between them was no wider than a breath. And you? He asked. What is it you need? Her voice trembled, breaking just a little. I need to stop running. A long moment passed before he reached out. Not quickly, but as if every inch of the movement required permission. His fingers brushed her cheek, rough against soft skin, tracing the curve where her tears had dried. Her eyes closed. That warmth, steady, unhurried, spread through her, quieting something restless inside. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. When she opened her eyes, the lamplight danced in them, trembling like water. They didn't kiss, didn't promise. They simply stood there, close enough for their breaths to find each other, for silence to become something tender. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against hers, and said in a voice so low it was almost prayer. He touched her cheek like he was remembering what gentleness felt like. And in that stable filled with the scent of hay and firelight, while the wind swept over the hills, Boone Ranch, for the first time since loss hollowed it, learned what it meant to hold warmth again. Not born of need, but of trust. Dawn slipped through the curtains, thin streaks of gold brushing the wooden walls. Amara woke to the scent of flour and the soft sound of laughter from the kitchen. She sat up slowly, hair tousled, heart still holding the warmth of the night before. A night without promises, only truth. Through the half-open door, she saw Nathan bent over the table, hands dusted white with flour. Ruth stood on a chair beside him, her cheeks puffed as she blew a cloud of flour off his nose. Both of them laughed, a round, unguarded laughter that seemed to lift the whole house with it. Careful there, Nathan said, voice rough but tender. You're getting flour in my hair. That's fine, Papa. Your hair's white already, Ruth chirped, making him laugh louder. Amara stood in the doorway, watching them. A picture so simple it ached. A father, a daughter, and the mother the child had imagined for 3 long years. She tightened her hand around the doorframe. The warmth in her chest shifted into fear. A knock at the porch startled her. Mrs. Callahan stood outside, a basket of apples in her arms. Her smile was polite, but her eyes measured. "Morning, Miss Hayes," she said. "Yesterday's festival, quite the sight. Folks can't stop talking." Amara inclined her head. "I hope we didn't trouble anyone." Mrs. Callahan set the basket down. Her tone softened, but only slightly. "Oh no, not trouble. Just, people aren't used to seeing Boone walk beside someone like you. He's a good man, but you know this town. It doesn't take kindly to change." "Someone like me?" The woman hesitated. "A colored teacher, living under his roof. That's all they're saying. I don't judge, of course." Each word fell like a raindrop on cold skin, quiet, but biting. Amara thanked her, took the basket, and closed the door slowly. She leaned against the wall, breath unsteady. Her heart thudded like she'd done something wrong. Last night, she had allowed herself to believe, that belonging was possible, that warmth could live without permission. But this morning, a single phrase had pulled her back to earth. Someone like you. She washed her face, tied her hair, and met her own eyes in the mirror. There she saw not the woman who sang a child to sleep, but the one Willow Creek would never accept. A knock sounded at the door again, this time Nathan's. He peeked in, smiling. "You're not coming down? Ruth says she's teaching you how to shape flour biscuits." Amara turned, forcing a smile. "I have to leave early." His smile faltered. "Leave? Where?" "Just some errands. I'll go back into town." Amara. He said her name for the first time without hesitation. "You don't have to go, not because of what people say." She looked away. "You don't understand. I came here to help for one day. I've already stayed too long." She brushed past him, voice catching. "Thank you for letting me know what home feels like. But I can't take what isn't mine." Nathan didn't stop her. He only stood still, his gray eyes dim as ash. The wind slipped through the porch, scattering her loose hair. In that pale light, they looked at each other, not with regret, but with the quiet fear of believing too much. She stepped outside. Her pale yellow dress swept across the threshold. The smell of cornbread still hung in the air, sweet and soft against the chill of morning. "Amara," he called, his voice low. She stopped, but didn't turn. "Tell Ruth I'm grateful for giving me one day." Then she left. The old mare waited by the post. Her cloak fluttered in the breeze as she climbed into the saddle. Nathan watched until her figure disappeared into the gray veil of mist beyond the dirt road. He stayed there for a long time, his fingers tightening around the porch rail until they ached. Something inside him, something unnamed, was leaving with her. Inside, Ruth woke and ran barefoot into the kitchen. "Papa?" Nathan turned. "Where's Miss Hayes?" she asked, rubbing her eyes. "I made a cookie for her." He didn't answer right away. He only knelt, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "She had to go, sweetheart." Ruth froze, lips trembling. "Mama?" No one answered. Only the wind moved through the open window, making the drawing on the wall sway. "My family," scrawled in a child's uneven hand. 3 figures still held hands beneath a crooked roof, but the color in the middle, the woman in yellow, had begun to fade. The sky above Willow Creek was a heavy gray that morning, thick as a blanket pressing down on the land. The first breath of winter wind carried the smell of rain and wet earth. Nathan woke to an unfamiliar silence. No light footsteps on the porch, no voice calling for the birds, no small laughter from the kitchen. He called her name once, then again. No answer. The house felt hollow, as if the air itself had been stolen. He ran from room to room. The bed still warm, the blanket tangled, the old stuffed rabbit tossed to the floor. By the window, a line of muddy footprints led toward the yard. "Ruth!" His voice tore through the quiet, hoarse and desperate, swallowed by the wind. Within the hour, the whole town knew. Nathan rode hard down the main road, shouting until his throat burned. Men from Willow Creek scattered, some toward the woods, others to the meadows and the riverbank. One swore he'd seen a small figure near the old church. Another said he caught sight of a child by the pine grove. Rain began to fall, slow at first, then thick and cold. The ground turned to mud beneath his horse's hooves. The sky fell lower, a curtain of gray swallowing the fields. Nathan's chest tightened until every breath felt like drowning. Each time he called her name, it came back smaller, weaker, as if the wind itself was eating his hope. Miles away, Amara was just returning to the inn when she heard the cries on the street. A woman clutched her shawl and said through trembling lips, "Boone's girl. She's gone." Amara didn't think. She threw her satchel onto her horse, fastened her cloak, and turned straight into the storm. She'd never remembered the road to Boone Ranch so clearly, each bend, each tree like a call pulling her home. When she arrived, Nathan was tying his horse under the porch, soaked to the bone. He turned sharply when he saw her. His face was pale, his eyes raw from rain and sleepless fear. "You've heard?" he rasped. "I have." She slid off her horse and stepped closer. "Where have you searched?" "Everywhere. The western woods, the creek, the schoolyard." His breath came short. "She's never gone far before. Never." Amara placed a hand on his shoulder, steady and sure. "We'll find her." They split directions, calling into the wind, their voices breaking between thunder and rain. The horses' hooves struck mud. The world became only mist, the sound of their shouting, and the echo of a name carried through storm. Ruth. Ruth. By late afternoon, the rain thinned to a glimmering mist. They stopped at the fork near the old church path. The gate sagged, iron rusted, its hinges groaning. Beyond it stretched a forgotten garden, once tended, now swallowed by wildflowers and thorny rosebushes. Amara froze. A memory flashed. Ruth sitting by the window, drawing. Her small voice whispering, "Mama loved the rose garden. She said it smelled like happy." Amara's breath caught. "Nathan! The church!" They spurred the horses forward. Mud splashed high on their cloaks as they rode, hearts pounding with the rhythm of hooves. When they reached the hill, Amara leapt down before her horse had stopped. She ran through the overgrown gate, pushing past the wild roses. And there, in the center of the garden, among wet petals and broken stems, Ruth sat curled against the cold earth, knees drawn to her chest, dress soaked through, shoulders shaking. "Ruth!" Amara cried, dropping to her knees. She pulled the child into her arms, clutching her tight. Ruth looked up, eyes red, lips trembling. "Mama's gone," she sobbed. "I thought if I sat here she'd come back, or you would." Amara's voice broke. She pressed her cheek against the girl's wet hair. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here." Ruth's cry turned into a wail, raw and aching. "Don't go again. Please. I don't want to be alone." Amara held her closer. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." Behind them, hooves splashed through puddles. Nathan stumbled forward, drenched and shaking. When he saw them, his knees nearly gave out. He fell beside them, wrapping both in his arms. The three of them stayed like that, in the scent of rain and roses. No words, only breath and tears. Nathan's voice came rough and low against the storm. "I tried to protect her, to protect myself, but I can't anymore." He looked at Amara, his eyes blurred with rain. "I hired you for one day," he said, "but somewhere between pretending and the truth, I forgot the difference." Amara met his gaze, trembling, then nodded, her arms still around the child. Above them, the clouds began to break. The sun slipped out low over the hills, scattering pale gold across their faces. Around them, the wild roses swayed in the wind, drops of water glimmering on their petals. And in that fading light, between rain, earth, and the sound of breath returning, Boone Ranch found what it had lost for years: the quiet, stubborn faith that love doesn't begin with a promise. It begins with the courage to return. That afternoon, the Wyoming sky hung pale and dim, the wind carrying the scent of early snow and the faint clatter of sleet. Amara stood before the small wooden house where her mother lay ill. The door creaked open, and a dry cough echoed from within, tightening something deep in her chest. Mrs. Hayes lay on the narrow bed, frail but with eyes still sharp, bright in a way that defied her body. When she saw her daughter, a weary smile lifted her face. "You came back," she said softly. "I thought maybe you wouldn't." Amara sat beside her, taking her thin hand into both of hers. "I went too far, Mama. I thought, if I stayed, I'd ruin everything." "Stayed where?" "At Boone Ranch." The name alone brought heat to her eyes. She told her mother everything, about Ruth and her laughter, about Nathan's quiet strength under the lantern light, about the moment his hand touched her cheek, and she could no longer tell what was real and what was pretend. Her mother listened in silence, her gaze steady, carrying the calm of someone who had weathered too many winters to be surprised by love or loss. "When you speak of them," she said finally, "you sound alive, Amara. But when you speak of leaving, all I hear is fear." Amara swallowed hard. "I'm not afraid of love," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm afraid they'll look at him and see a man who made a mistake, and that I'll be the reason they whisper again." Her mother smiled faintly, that knowing kind of smile that held both kindness and truth. "Safety isn't love, my girl. You've chosen safety your whole life because it hurt too much to trust. But if you walk away from love again, that fear will eat you slower than heartbreak ever could." The room fell quiet. The oil lamp flickered, casting gold over her mother's lined face, every crease telling its own story. Amara bowed her head, tears slipping down to the frail hand she held. "Do you think he'll forgive me?" "It's not forgiveness you'll need," her mother said. "It's courage to believe again, together." That night, the wind howled across the plains. Amara saddled her horse and rode back down the road that had once carried her away. The moon hid behind thick clouds, and far in the distance, the light from Boone Ranch still burned, a small, steady glow against the dark. By the time she reached the porch, her legs shook from cold and fear. The scent of burning wood and baked bread drifted through the air, sharp enough to make her heart ache. She drew a deep breath, then knocked. Once. Twice. Nathan opened the door. His shirt was wrinkled, eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. When he saw her, he didn't speak, didn't even breathe for a moment. The wind whispered through the doorway, carrying the scent of pine and smoke. Amara's voice broke as she said, "I can't pretend anymore." He stood still, as if afraid a single move might wake him from whatever this was. "Pretend?" he asked quietly. She nodded, stepping forward. "I can't keep pretending I came only for Ruth, or out of kindness. I can't smile like my heart isn't breaking. I don't want to leave anymore, Nathan." He closed his eyes, drawing a long breath. When he opened them, something had eased. I'm tired of pretending too, he said. She took another step closer. The lantern light flickered in her dark eyes. I don't want to be the woman you hired to help for a day. I want to stay, no, not out of pity, but because I need to believe this is real. Nathan swallowed, his voice low and rough. You don't have to pretend to be her mother, Amara. He lifted his hand, touching her cheek, gently, reverently. You've been that for a long time now. Her lips trembled into a smile through the tears. And you? She whispered. Me, he murmured, his voice breaking. I don't need another day to know I can't live without you. Either of you. Amara trembled, not from the cold, but from the release of it all. The fear, the running, the ache. She let her hand rest in his. Outside, the wind passed through the pines, carrying the scent of melting snow into the room. No more words were needed. They stood there in the small kitchen, their hands entwined, breaths mingling like two steady heartbeats finally falling into rhythm. It wasn't a beginning. It wasn't an ending. It was the quiet moment when two people, once lost, finally dared to name the place where they belonged. And in that silence, the old wooden house remembered what it meant to hold warmth. Not borrowed, not imagined, but home. A week later, autumn sunlight washed the valley in gold. Willow Creek gleamed clean and new after days of rain. The church bell tolled in slow, even rhythm, calling the town to Sunday service. Boots clicked on the wooden path. Voices murmured greetings, and curious glances darted between smiles, more watchful than devout. Amara sat in the back pew with Ruth. She still wasn't used to being looked at. Once those eyes had been blades, cold, suspicious, sharp with judgment. But today they seemed duller, softened at the edges. Ruth's small hand clutched hers tightly, as if to make sure she wouldn't vanish. When Pastor Grant climbed the pulpit, the church fell into stillness. His sermon that morning was about faith and forgiveness. But as he closed the Bible, preparing to end the service, Nathan Boone stood. The scrape of wood against the floor made every head turn. He walked forward slowly, shoulders straight, shirt clean but wrinkled, hands rough and knotted together. Light from the high windows framed him in gold. "Pastor," he said, his deep voice calm but carrying through the silence, "I have something to say." Grant gave a small nod and stepped back, leaving the pulpit open. The room held its breath. Nathan inhaled once, his gaze sweeping over familiar faces, the same ones who'd nodded at him on the street, the same ones who'd whispered when they saw Amara beside him. He didn't carry notes, didn't read. He just spoke. "You all know who I am," he began. "The quiet man at the edge of town, a widower, owner of Boone Ranch, the man who spent 3 years not saying much to anyone." He paused. His eyes found the back row, where Amara sat, head bowed, her hands clutching her skirt. "But those 3 years," Nathan continued, "were years of silence. My house was a shell." Ruth stopped speaking. The laughter left with her mother, and I forgot how to smile. Until she walked in. A faint stir of whispers moved through the pews, but Nathan's voice stayed steady. "That woman. She brought life back into a house that had forgotten what it sounded like. She made my daughter laugh again. She made me remember that a home isn't built from wood or stone, but from the warmth of the people inside it." He turned fully to face the crowd. His jaw was set, but his voice softened. She isn't a guest. She isn't a stranger. And she sure as hell isn't pretend. He placed a hand over his chest. She's my family. The church fell silent. No one moved. A few men shifted uncomfortably. One older woman dabbed her eyes with a handkerchief. Pastor Grant stood with a faint smile, the light catching in his kind, wrinkled eyes. Then, a single clap. Firm, deliberate. Mrs. Callahan. The baker who once said Amara had brought Ruth back to life. Another clap followed, then another, and before long the whole church filled with applause, soft, hesitant at first, then growing, rising into something whole and human. Amara lifted her head. Tears streamed down her hands. Ruth beamed and climbed onto the pew, waving. "Papa!" she shouted. "Mama's here!" Nathan smiled, stepping down from the pulpit to the aisle. He took Ruth's hand, then turned, reaching toward the back. His eyes met Amara's. Calm, steady, without the smallest flicker of doubt. She hesitated for only a moment, then stood. Her steps were slow but sure, the whisper of her dress echoing through the room. When her brown hand met his sun-worn one, Nathan squeezed gently and said, loud enough for all to hear, "She belongs to this town as much as I do, maybe more." From the crowd, Mr. Grayson, the shopkeeper who once humiliated her, rose to his feet, face flushed. His voice trembled. "Miss Hayes, I was wrong. I'm sorry." Amara nodded through her tears, a small, broken smile forming on her lips. When the service ended, the townsfolk filed out, one by one. But this time no one stared. No one whispered. They smiled. Some nodded. A few women patted Ruth's shoulder as they passed. On the road back to Boone Ranch, the air smelled of damp earth and marigolds. Nathan shrugged off his coat and draped it over Amara's shoulders. She didn't speak, just looked down at his hand closing over hers. Ruth sat behind them on the wagon, humming softly. When they reached home, Amara stopped at the porch. The marigolds she and Ruth had planted now stood in bloom, the first of the season, gold and trembling in the breeze. Nathan placed a hand on her back, his voice low and warm. "See? They came back." Amara smiled, eyes glistening. Maybe it wasn't just the flowers. The wind swept gently across the fields. The sun sank low, spilling amber light over the three figures standing on the porch, a man, a woman, and a child. And in that moment, Boone Ranch was no longer a place of loss, but of quiet beginnings, where love, long delayed and softly spoken, finally took root and stayed. Their first winter together came softly, like breath on glass. Snow fell thin and steady, layering Boone Ranch in a hush of white. There were no longer gaps between the three of them, only new rhythms, small and tender, burning like quiet embers within the heart of a home reborn. Each morning, Nathan rose early, his boots pressed into the snow with a steady rhythm, smoke curling from his shoulders as he walked toward the barn. The sound of his steps was the heartbeat of a man who had found purpose again. From the window, Amara stirred the morning coffee, watching him through the soft fog of heat and light. The air carried the scent of wood smoke, roasted beans, and melting snow, the scent of home. Ruth came tumbling down the stairs, hair wild, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "Mama, the snow's white like milk," she said, her voice clumsy but clearer than ever. Amara laughed, wrapping a scarf around the girl's neck. "And milk, my love, is made from kindness." Ruth giggled, bursting out onto the porch. Nathan lifted her into his arms and spun her through the drifting snow. Their laughter rose like sunlight, bright enough to warm the gray morning sky. Spring arrived with the sound of melting ice. Water trickled down the rocks behind the house, and they planted new marigolds along the porch. Ruth dug holes with her tiny shovel, while Amara pressed soil around the roots, and Nathan carried the watering pail. "Papa, Mama's planting too deep again," Ruth declared solemnly. "Then you better teach her," Nathan said, eyes glinting with amusement. All three of them laughed, and for the first time in years, Amara heard her own laughter join the wind. That afternoon, when the sunlight slanted across the floor, she spread paper on the table to teach Ruth her first letters. Each one was shaky and uneven, but the child's concentration was fierce. "What are you writing, sweetheart?" Amara asked. Ruth smiled. "Family." Amara placed her hand over her daughter's, guiding her slowly, tracing each letter as if carving it into both their hearts. Outside, Nathan hammered nails into the barn roof. The sound echoed steady and sure. When he looked up, he saw the two of them framed by the window. Amara's dark hair caught in the light. Ruth bent over her page. He stopped mid-swing, letting the sight fix itself into memory. Summer came buzzing with life. The marigolds had bloomed bright and full, bees drifting lazily between the blossoms. Ruth picked the flowers one by one, bringing them inside to place on the table. At night, they ate beneath the glow of an oil lamp while Nathan told stories of his younger days, of dusty towns and long rides across the plains. "Papa, why don't you go anymore?" Ruth asked. He looked at Amara before answering. His voice was quiet but sure. "Because I've found where I'm meant to stop." Amara didn't reply. She simply smiled and slipped her hand into his beneath the table. Silent, gratitude, steady and real. Autumn followed with its golden hush. The fields turned amber, stretching endlessly under the hills. Amara stood before the blackboard in a small schoolhouse newly opened, children's laughter echoing off the walls. Through the window, Nathan appeared, carrying a basket of apples. He didn't enter. He just set the basket on the sill and nodded once. It was enough. A wordless promise. "I'm still here." That evening, Ruth sat on the floor arranging wooden blocks. Her lips moved as she spelled the word she'd been practicing all day. Home. Amara, sewing on the porch, turned when she heard her daughter's voice. Ruth stood in the lamplight, proud and beaming beside her neat little row of letters. "Did I spell it right, Mama?" she asked. Amara knelt, pulling her close. "You did, my love." She looked at the 4 simple letters, home, and tears blurred her eyes. Not from sorrow, but from knowing she had stopped running. Everything she once fled, love, belonging, trust, had been waiting for her here all along, in a house that asked for no proof but her presence. Outside, twilight washed the fields in gold. The marigolds nodded in the breeze. Ruth's laughter mingled with the wind as Nathan's footsteps crossed the porch. He looked at them and smiled, his gaze soft and steady as the morning of peace they had built together. Amara turned to him, whispering, "We made it, didn't we?" Nathan nodded, voice low and certain. "Yes, we did." And in that quiet moment, time seemed to pause, leaving only breath, light, and a love so simple it could carry them through every season yet to come. The first morning after their wedding came softly, like a whispered prayer. Dawn spilled gold across the eastern hills, dew clung to the thatched roof, and a rooster's call echoed faintly from a distant farm. There were no fireworks, no music, only the smell of baking bread, the murmur of boiling water, and the tender breath of a morning 3 souls had waited so long to call a beginning. Amara carried a tray of biscuits out to the porch, the warm scent curling into the cool air. A bit of flour dusted her dress, her hair tied loosely, stray curls catching the newborn light. Every movement was slow, careful, as though too much noise might break the fragile calm. Out in the yard, Nathan knelt beside Ruth in the damp grass, helping her gather marigolds still heavy with dew. "Pick the biggest one," Nathan said, his voice low and steady. "Who's it for, Papa?" Ruth asked, her eyes bright as sunlight. "For the woman who taught this house how to laugh again." Amara leaned against the porch post, one hand shading her eyes. The wind carried the scent of soil, milk, and fresh-cut grass, sounds of life wrapped in the hush of a world finally at peace. No one watching would believe that only a year ago, this had been a house of silence and grief. When father and daughter climbed the steps, Ruth held her basket to her chest. "For Mama," she said proudly. Amara bent down, smiling. "Thank you, my love." Then she looked up at Nathan. His shirt hung open at the collar, a smear of dirt on his wrist, and his eyes, soft and steady as spring earth, found hers. They both laughed again, their laughter joining the wind, bright and fragile, like morning itself. The morning light wrapped them in gold, tracing a halo around their joined hands, as if the sun itself wished to keep this moment alive. A family born not from blood, but from grace. They rode slowly through the field, Ruth between them, laughter ringing through the air. And in that moment, the past, the fears, the loneliness, the whispers, the long cold nights, dissolved like mist at dawn.